Good evening, everyone. I certainly regret the fact that you cannot see more of this documentary film since we don't have equipment anymore. However, if you come tomorrow night, half an hour earlier, you'll be able to see more of what we have seen in the last 5 minutes. I believe it's very interesting material. Our lecture tonight is entitled Laws of Human Nature. We can also entitle it as the greatest archaeological discovery in the last century. What made archaeologists of the last century wonder? What is the most significant archaeological discovery today? You see, our planet Earth today, when observed from the space and the space shuttle, looks very beautiful. Yet when we land on it, we see much misery, suffering, horror, etc. That is all due to the fact that there is death on our planet, and that is why our planet is called Death Mill. People do not give much notice to that fact. Only when a loved one passes away, we think about that act for several days or months. However, the purpose of this series of lectures is to answer the most vital question: is death conquered enemy or not? Are we but a spark in the universe, or are we not? Leading scientist names such as Pasteur, Maxwell, Newton and others believe that there is a creator. If such a creator created life on the earth, they believe he is able to do it again. They went much further than that and attempted to identify that creator. Who is he? They wondered and wanted to know if that creator wants to reveal himself to us. Consider the creation of a human life. From the moment that sperm fertilizes ovum, we experience all kinds of miracles. Now, can those miracles happen spontaneously, or is there an energy involved in them? Last night we said that God created Adam and Eve and gave them life. But He also allowed parents today to procreate. He did that because He wanted to include all of us in His creative efforts. In that context, I would like to ask you, and I would like you and us to consider different systems in operation in our immediate environment. Here is the most complex and the most perfect kilogram in the universe: human brain. It weighs about 1.5 kilograms. See the different areas of our brain in charge of different activities of human organism. Now let us focus on the front lobe. Our intellectual functions are located in it, our consciousness and the center for proper behavior. Now, in evolutive sense, what is the purpose of having the center for good behavior? If there is so-called natural struggle for the survival of the fittest, if we behaved nicely, that means that we wouldn't be able to achieve anything in our life. Evolution claims that there is struggle. Man becomes enemy of other humans. Yet why do we have center for good behavior and social behavior in our front lobe? If we look back some years ago, we can see the case of a young man, Phineas Gage. He lived in England and was a railman. When a huge explosion happened at the railway station where he worked, a metal pole 105 meters long struck his head and got stuck in his skull. Everyone rushed to his help and took him to the doctor. There was a surgery performed on him, and doctors got the pole out of his head. Here we see the remains of that pole. To everyone's amazement, he continued to live for 17 more years. You see on this slide how that pole looked like. Now, prior to that accident, Phineas Gage was a pleasant person to be around, a very fine young man. However, soon after the accident, he was fired from work because he became unkind. He often argued. In one word, his entire behavior changed. For 17 years, Harvard scientists analyzed the location where the pole penetrated into his skull. Here is a scan of that. Luckily for him, his vital centers were not damaged, centers for breathing, heart functions, etc. And because of that, he managed to live for 17 years after that accident. He died from another illness. However, it was established that there is center for social behavior in our front lobe. That is where the basic traits that characterize human beings originate. In fact, how can a man change his behavior? I've seen one such example where an accident changed human behavior, but that is not the sole reason for nor the cause. We often see people around us arguing and fighting. They say to one another, "Well, that is not fair, that is not right. I would have never done that to you." Now the other person responds, "Well, it is true, it happened. I was just in such living conditions that caused me to do such and such." However, occupational wars, such as the one waged by Hitler, was certainly unjust, so we classify wars as just and unjust. Now, if there is no universal model, then all wars are in the same category, be they conquering or defensive ones. Many also say there is no universal cause, but the different civilizations have different customs and legal regulations. But let me ask you this question. Is there a civilization or a nation where deserting, treachery, and similar things are accepted? Well, certainly not. Also, does any nation in this world value selfishness and boasting of selfish people? Well, not one. There are also discussions on polygamy in this world, and we can argue about that and agree or not agree with that practice. But there is no civilization in this world which accepts that a man or a woman may have all the men or all the women in this world. Well, all that means that there certainly is universal model. There are universal models of behavior in our world today. So there is a law of human nature that we might consider. Even though everything has changed and there are all kinds of deviation in our society today, and there are no barriers related to immorality. What can cause the change of our behavior related to that universal model? One of the reasons can be wound or tumor of the front lobe, but also different kinds of depressions into which we may fall consciously or unconsciously. Depressions cause huge blows to our memory and behavior. That is why the American Health Department issued the following statement saying, "As far as it is known, no bird has ever tried to build more nests than its neighbors. No fox ever bothered about having only one den in which it can hide. No squirrel has ever died from worrying that it did not store enough food for all the winters to come, and no dog has ever suffered from insomnia for not having set aside enough bones for his old age." Now it sounds sympathetic, doesn't it? Yet do you know how many people ended up in hospitals and psychiatric institutions because of such problems? Because they wanted all those things. There was a London millionaire who offered prize for the best answer to the question, "What cannot be purchased with money?" A young man who wrote the answer won the prize. The man wrote, "You cannot buy a baby smile, young age, love of the person that loves you, and you cannot buy an open sky. Those four things cannot be purchased." And we're going to analyze whether death is a conquered enemy, and why are humans prone to all sorts of depressions? Is that because of purposeful or unpurposeful reasons? Our behavioral change can also be caused by consumption of heavy and light drugs. Do you know how nicotine and other drugs can damage our central nervous system? They can also damage genes. Now you're viewing genetic structure here. That is a nice encyclopedia of building our bodies. Each 100,000 million cells have record in which one of its gene. Our organism also has 206 bones and 600 muscles. It is all recorded in genetic structure, as well as the eye and hair colors and many other traits. Now various drugs and cigarette smoke can damage this genetic structure. But let us focus on how light drugs can damage synaptic connections between our nervous cells. Here is the communication between nervous cells. All the signals that we get from peripheral ends, what we see and hear, must be transported to our brain in electric way. We have biological currents in us. Just as electric currency allows functioning of electric equipment around us, so do we also have biological currents in us. They are of much lower voltage, and we notice them only when we visit doctors for EKG scanning. EG are actually the currencies in our heart. However, the signals from peripheral areas are not transported only by biological currencies, but there are also chemical mediators in us. We function based on combination of chemistry and currencies, and that is how we obtain information. What is the very significant thing for the intelligence? The largest number of possible of synaptic connections between the nervous cells. There was an experiment on mice in Labyrinth. Those mice that had harder time to get to food, after 6 months had many more synaptic connections. That shows that greater difficulty they had to get to food caused better development of their intelligence. That example is quite obvious even in human population. It is fact that here in the Balkans it is harder for people to get money, food, etc. When our students go to Western countries, they become the best students and business people. Now why is that? Well, because here, while they lived in difficult conditions, they developed those synaptic connections. Picture an average American who eats hamburger, watches TV and plays over internet. Now therefore, even though we live in difficult conditions, there is advantage to that as well. The most important is the number of communication lines between nervous cells. Why is that relevant for our behavior? Well, you see, light and heavy drugs can damage communication lines between our cells. Here is a signal transfer which occurs in split second. Impulse comes from nervous cell represented above. Then these chemical mediators are released. They function as keys that fit right to their respective locks. Then they transfer the signal on to the next cell. The other nervous cell receives the signal and then it shoots it off to the brain or another human organ. That process, however, has to be reversible, otherwise we would not be able to move our arm more than once. Now what does all that mean? It means that these processes occur daily, in split seconds, in our central nervous system. Due to that, we are able to use various forms of intelligence. Here we see an animation of a human being. We are interested to know what are those mechanisms that can change our behavior. We have already said that those factors are wounds, cancer, light and heavy drugs. But there is another important element. That is the law of human nature, which tells us that we become that what we look upon. Stunning new data has just been released, and it shows that what people view, particularly children, is manifested in their behavior. It is estimated in America that up to the age of 16, children see about 200,000 violence acts on TV. It was also shown that 22% of crimes committed by 20 and 20 plus years old directly stems from brutal TV shows episodes and movies. Another indicator on how that what we watch influences us can be seen from the following statistics. In the period from 1945 to 1947, the number of murders and murder attempts swelled to 90% in United States. At the same time, that rate has dropped for 9% in the same period in South Africa. Scientists have wondered what caused such a drastic difference in those two regions. Do you know what is the reason? Until 1974, television was forbidden in South Africa. Well, this is not an attack on television. Watching television also shows various programs that are very valuable, but the implication is quite clear. We have to think what we are going to watch on TV. The average family sits in front of TV for 4 hours. It all depends what they are going to watch in those 4 hours. Because we see this law in operation, the law of human mind, which says that we become that what we watch. So those are mechanisms that can cause behavioral change. Do we have a reference point that we can lean on in our physical lives? Do all our senses receive signals properly that we can get from peripheral organs, or is that all just a pure imagination? Let us consider our balance center found in our middle ear. That center is built of those semicircular channels. Channels are filled with liquid and they allow us to maintain balance. Each human is able to stand up upright only because of signals that come from balance center. If that center gets disordered, we fall. Those channels in the middle ear are in charge of directing us to various directions and maintaining our balance. It is very important that those 3 semicircular channels are filled with liquid. When we move our head forward, backward, to the left or front, one of those channels is very active. Its liquid, so-called endolymph, moves over receptors and we get the signal of which direction did we move to. In that way we can regulate our upright position. You can see that on this chart. When we move our head, the liquid in channels gets moved and information is sent to our central nervous system, which adjusts our position. Now here is one problem which is very important. See on this chart that liquid moved to right since we moved head right. This receptor has moved right as well as it emits signal and we get information that we have moved to the right. Now what happens if we suddenly stop? Inertia would move the liquid nevertheless, and we would get wrong information. We have information that we are still moving while we are actually standing in one spot. Now do you know how you're going to make such an experiment? Very easily. Place a friend on a rotation chair and blindfold him, spin him and then stop the chair without him noticing it. Because of this effect of inertia of liquid, he will have impression that he is spinning the other way, yet he will be standing in one point. And that again shows that our balance center is not absolutely reliable. You see, without having a reference point, which is our eyes, we are not aware to what direction we move. This phenomena is very present with pilots who find themselves in space outside clouds. Unless they consult the instruments and control system, they are not able to know what directions they move at given moment. And that happened in the Second World War quite often, when winds came from behind and pilots did not use compasses. They ended up deeply within the enemy territory, and their lives ended tragically simply because they did not pay attention to compass. But they thought that they should remain still in the air before landing. So our balance center without a reference point is not reliable. pylons that are beyond clouds have no idea whether they are moving forward, backward, left or right, and therefore in order for us to function properly, our center for balance must have a reference point in the form of our eyes. Just as pilots need compasses, we also need a compass in physical and spiritual sense. That is what you see on this picture. Do we have a compass in physical and spiritual sense? When you watch certain people on media, can you be sure that they are telling you the truth? Or you have to check everything they tell us? So we need to have a reference point. Our center for balance is not totally reliable, so we have to rely on the reference point. And this is not the only case. There are many cases of this nature in our lives. Now let us see our visible ear. It is our center for hearing. Sound waves reach our eardrum, where they are transferred into mechanical waves. Here is a picture of an eardrum. These ear bones, the smallest ones in our ear, those that we talked about last night, the bones which evolutionists say they evolved and migrated from the lower jaw all the way up to the ear and planted themselves there. Well, anyway, the mechanical waves in our ears are transported to the oval opening by those bones. Then they exert vibration on endolymphic liquid. That liquid within our ear is moved, and that is how our receptors vibrate. The signal is passed on to us and we can hear it. And that is such a complex system. But even more complex is how a person, since humans are adaptable, can find themselves in very difficult situations. How is that situation manifested? If exposed to a prolonged period of noise, when such a person moves to a normal environment, say to a cottage surrounded by nature, he can experience all kinds of psychological difficulties, such as anxiety, unrest, insomnia, irritability. Why is that? Well, because his body got adapted to noisy environment, and once he is in a peaceful surrounding, his body experiences psychological phenomena, and therefore our body is adaptable to both good and bad living conditions, and that might result in psychological problems. Our body is exceptionally adaptable mechanism. This is not just the case in human population, but is also noticeable in the animal world. This organ is called corticus. It is very complex. In animal kingdom, such in frogs, if you thrust a frog into hot water, it will quickly jump out of there, but if you place it in a cold water and gradually heat the vessel, the frog will turn white and will die without realizing that it should jump out of that environment. The thing is that frogs' receptors get so adapted in a given moment that the frog is not able to discern between cold and hot waters. That is an excellent example of adaptability in animal kingdom. To what extent do people get adapted and how do they respond? Dr. Solomon Asch experimented on 8 students. He told them that when he would ask them which line is the shortest, that all 8 of them would give the wrong answer. Then he added the 9th student, who was not the same person all the time. That 9th one was replaced several times. And of 10 students, 25% only gave the right answers, while 75% gave the wrong one. That is a huge percentage. 25 out of 100 students give the right answer. Now that shows how humans are very adaptable. When the students were asked why they gave the wrong answer, they said that they followed the opinion of majority. And that is exactly how people work. What the majority says is taken for granted. Authority argument is no argument in any sort of research. These are just several small examples to illustrate the fact that human organism is exceptionally adaptable. Our organism needs a compass outside of itself so that we know how to act. When we analyze various archaeological discoveries in the world, we come to the knowledge of various aspects. How did ancient civilizations live? That is one aspect that we get to know in the process. The most spectacular discovery occurred in 1947 during an archaeological dig in the area of Qumran. That area is by the Dead Sea. The State of Israel is located between the Mediterranean and Dead Seas. Here we see the landscape surrounding about the Dead Sea. Now the Dead Sea bears such a name because there is no life in it. Here's the landscape. And you see, the Dead Sea contains over 24% of salt and you can never sink into it. That sea is surrounded by volcanic stones. Right there, something spectacular occurred. Now first let us see who populated that area several thousands of years ago. It was populated by a group called Essenes. It was a Jewish community that found refuge in that place. They were thinkers and scribes. They lived in caves around Qumran area. For hundreds of years they copied the holy writings, making efforts to do it perfectly. For example, when they came across a word that signified Creator's name, they stopped and went to ritual basins to ritually cleanse themselves before they would continue copying the text. Some would say that those people were typical fanatics, but we are going to see why was that important. They copied texts on parchments. It was precisely known how many letters were above the main letter, how many to the left and right side. They perfectly and fanatically copied the texts. Ink containers that date back to more than 2000 years ago were also found in Qumran area. So they would find the central letter and then counted the number of letters above, below, left and right of that central one. There could be no error whatsoever. In case of making error, the text with error was burnt. A group of those who copied the text were known as Masoretic writers. At that time they were as photocopiers today. When the Roman siege came and there was a threat of annihilation near, they wrapped up those writings into linen, placed them in jars and hid them in caves. In the year 68, when Jericho was burned to the ground, they hid in jars those writings in the area of Qumran. We are viewing now the landscape of Qumran. For 2000 years those writings on parchments were well hidden, so that Romans would not find them and burn them as well. The conditions for the writings to be preserved were quite adequate. There was enough moist and other things which allowed the writings to remain to this day. You see a picture now of one of those jars. One day in 1947 the Bedouins were pasturing their sheep and goats, and the Bedouin wanted to return one of his sheep to the flock, so he cast a stone and then heard that something got broken. He noticed an opening in a cave. He called on his friends and then they went down the caves. He expected to find gold, silver, diamonds because in that area robbers stored their treasures. They found 10 jars. When they inspected them they found no gold, silver or precious stones but just stinky animal skin. They tried to use those writings for their own benefit. They took them to the nearest city in the area, Bethlehem. They didn't manage to sell them, so they offered them to shoemakers who would or could use the skin for sandals. Now shoemakers refused because the skin parchments were very frail, and nobody in Bethlehem wanted to buy those writings. A tradesman Candy appeared and bought the writings because he believed that those were Syrian writings, and thus he sold them to St. Marcus Monastery in Jerusalem. Shortly after, those writings were smuggled out to the United States. Many scientists got involved in studying those writings. At one point, Professor Yadin from Jewish University visited USA for a lecture tour. He read a newspaper ad that offered ancient writings for sale. He called in and went to see the writings, and he noticed that they were incredibly old. He negotiated the price and purchased the majority of writings. This happened in 1947, at the heels of the Second World War. It was an area and the era of atheism. Those who advocated creationist concept were hiding from the public, for such a concept was no longer popular. Atheism and evolution were on the rise. At the same time, the evolutionists asked those who advocated creationism, "What is the authentic proof for those writings that you quote?" For those writings dated back to 10 centuries before Christ, and there was a huge time gap between the time the writings were originally written and then copied in the 10th century before Christ. So 12 centuries had elapsed, and there were simply no arguments for creationists. Yet in 1947 that Bedouin discovered the writings, and then Professor Yadin purchased those manuscripts. Eventually they were placed under the protection of the State of Israel, the Jewish state. When Bedouins saw that it was payable, since the price of the writings grew to astronomical proportions, they organized a search for more, and they found several more writings in jars. Since they noticed that small parchments had good prices too, they shredded certain writings to the size of post stamps. Therefore today the scientists are trying to connect and analyze those writings in order to get to the truth, in order to get to the original Jewish records. The scientists analyzed those texts and concluded that they are the oldest texts directly originating from the Old Testament. They also established that those texts date back to the 2nd century before Christ up to the year 68 after Christ. Therefore, the time gap of 1200 years has been bridged over. Today, no researcher can doubt the veracity of those writings because they were used by Christ and the apostles. So we see fantastic records in place. When the scientists compared those records with contemporary Old Testament, they saw that they are totally identical and that there is an absolute authenticity. That means that today we are using these Jewish writings of the Old Testament in their authentic form. That is why Qumran findings give veracity to the Old Testament. Today scientists are still researching and connecting the pieces of parchments. Today there are modern techniques such as DNA technique. For example, it is not known whether pieces are from the same page of parchment or from the same parchment. Through DNA analysis, it becomes obvious, for example, whether those pieces originate from goat, gazelle, or sheep skin. That allows researchers to assemble those fragments on their respective pages. Thus, we reach the conclusion that all that we read today in the Jewish writings called Tanakh, or the Old Testament, as it is translated to our language, is authentic material. All the writings are reconstructed and placed in Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem. You see a record of it. The shrine is made in the shape of jar's lid. Inside there are hundreds of parchments. The central position is given to Isaiah's scroll dating back to the 2nd century before Christ. It is long about 8 meters, wide about 30 centimeters. These writings are preserved under proper conditions. Those parchments are more than 2,000 years old. Human eyes had not seen those parchments until Bedouin Mohammed Aden found them. And therefore we have archaeological findings that gives us absolute proof that we have authentic texts. Masoretic writers who served as photocopiers did a wonderful job. There is no ancient record written or preserved in that shape and that sense. That all happened in 1947, during the atheist era. This discovery showed that we have authentic text today. Now the question is raised as to who was the author of that authentic text. The creator was able to write all that by himself, yet he loves to cooperate with people, just as you see the names of various firms, so and so and son. Fathers love to cooperate with sons, and that is how the creator loves to cooperate with people. Therefore, through Jewish writers, he conveyed to us information about the past and the future as well. The Jewish writings, called Tanakh, are made of three portions. The first portion is Torah, the book of Moses. Second is Ketuvim, which are historical writings. And the creator wants us to know what happened in history, how the planet Earth came about, lifespan of the past, what happened on our planet. The third group of writings are called Ne'evim, the prophetic writings. The creator wants to tell us what is going to be happening on this planet. Who were the writers? Well, there were shepherds and agriculturalists, and there were also noblemen and kings. Do you know how creator sees people? He pays no attention to academic titles nor material wealth, but he looks on their hearts. The heart, the character, is what differentiates people and should be the only differentiation point. So the heart is the issue. If a person has a character, he will easily gain knowledge and academic titles. If he is dishonest, no academic title or material status will help him. All social layers were involved in writing these historical writings. There in human history there was a man named Panin who lived around 1890. He was a Russian immigrant to Canada, and while he toured around the United States, in a train he picked up a copy of newspaper laying on the seat next to his. He read a challenge which a leading evolutionist presented to the champion of creation, challenging him to prove creator's existence and authenticity of the writings we have just talked about. Up to that point, Panin had been involved in analyzing Greek and Jewish texts for 10 years. He set out to answer the evolution under pseudonym VRL. In order to understand what we said and what he wrote to that evolutionist, we have to take a look at Greek and Jewish alphabets. Each Jewish letter has numerical value, just as we see in Latin where L equals 50, X equals 10, etc. In a Jewish text you always see numbers as well. Those numbers are ascribed to each letter and they are all together and they all have a total sum value. The same is the case with Greek alphabet as well. Now that was used in writing the New Testament. Panin came to stunning conclusions about the regularity with which the original texts were written and saw their mathematical values. There are 66 books in both Old and the New Testament. Mathematical law in writing that Dr. Ivan Panin found is quite stunning. The number of words in dictionary can be divided with 7. The number of words that start with vowels is also divisible with 7. The number of words that start with consonant is divisible with 7. The number of letters in dictionary is divisible with 7. All the letters, be they vowels or consonants, are divisible with number 7. The number of words that appear in dictionary more than once is divisible with number 7. The number of words that appear only once is divisible with 7. The number of nouns and words that are nouns are also divisible with number 7. The number of personal names is divisible with number 7. Also, the number of male names is divisible with 7, as well as the number of female names. The number of words that start with each letter in the alphabet is divisible with number 7. No human could ever establish that mathematical law and regularity and dependency in the Holy Writings. Panin also explained the origin of the very first sentence that exists in the Jewish writing, Bereshit bara Elohim, reading from the right to left. In the beginning, God created. It does not say in the beginning there was a big bang, or in the beginning everything happened by a chance. No, it says in the beginning God created. As he analyzed that first sentence in the Jewish writings, here are the stunning conclusions that he reached. These 3 words have 14 letters divided with 7, which is 2 weeks. Their total value equals 140 divided with 7 equals 20 weeks. Number 140 with its denominators has 7 numbers. 140 equals times and equals 7 times 2 times 2 times 5. The sum total of those numbers equals 21, which is 3 weeks. Those are only characteristics of the first sentence in the Old Testament. Then come some other characteristics. The sum total of 76, 23, and 41 and 140 equals 28, which equivalents to 4 weeks. The sum total of every second number in both cases equals 14, which is equivalent to 2 weeks. 7 and 8 is also there. If we multiply the simple denominators of those numbers with those, that is, with their ordinal numbers, their total sum equals 245, or 7 times 7 times 5. Reverse multiplication gives the sum total of 315, which equivalents to 45 weeks. Now, here on the chart, you see how that all looks like in practice. Now you see on this chart how all those mathematical operations are done. We come to 41 plus 23 plus 76, 140, and when we add them all up, we get 700, which is the sum total, and number 700 can be divided with 7. And those are just 10 characteristics out of many, many others. There are just 10 in the first sentence of the Jewish writings. And therefore Mr. Panin responded to VRL, initial challenger, a big atheist, and called upon him to write only 300 logical words by using these laws, and that he, Panin, would admit defeat. And do you know how many pages of Jewish writings are written in this very manner? 1,200 pages of logical text. Even today, with computer help, it is absolutely impossible to write 300 logical sentences by following these precise mathematical laws. That gives us an absolute proof that which is written in Tanakh, Torah, and other writings, we commonly refer to as the Old and the New Testament, could not come about by a chance. The probability that only one such sentence as this one would come out by a chance is 1 against 7 on 10th grade, which is 1 in 280 millions. And thus we see that we have the text which is authentic in archaeological sense, in mathematical sense, and we also have seen from the lectures that biology, paleontology, genetics confirm all that is written in Mosaic books, that it is absolutely true. It makes it perfectly clear that we possess a valid argument. Some claim that what we have is not original writing and that origin is kept at Vatican, but these indicators show that we indeed have the original text. All we need to do is research and establish the fact about our past, present, and future. Hegel said that science is applied logic. I appeal to you to apply the logical thinking by using these higher brain capacities that we have and that differentiate us from animals. We should analyze what happened in the past, take a reference point, because we have seen that in both physical and spiritual sense we need to have a reference point. There must be a law of human nature there, and we must take a valid reference point, but prior to that we should confirm the validity of that reference point. And it is even more important in today's world in which we live, the world where all scientific disciplines as well as industries use all kinds of manipulations, such as food industry. Do you know for how long has cow's disease been known before it became public? You see, profit is what matters today, not people. Do you know how many people live from food industry? So profit takes precedence, you see. Do you know what is going on in pharmaceutical industry? Well, it is well known that that industry stimulates doctors. In fact, it prescribes the doctors medicine. Wages are so low in medical professions, so doctors become experimental mice for pharmaceutical industry. This industry is the second most powerful following the military industry. What shall we say about political and many other manipulations? Can we ever rely on any human today? Absolutely not. We must have a reference point in order to function. Do you know what will some people say when a question will arise about what and why they did certain things? They will say that they did not know. But that is not an adequate answer. Firstly, there is consciousness. A man knows through his consciousness what is right and what is wrong. It tells him whether it is okay to kill someone or not. Even though the conscience can go numb and we get indifferent, and so we do all kinds of crime, such as we have seen in most recent wars, but even if the consciousness has gone numb, there is a written record. We have seen that the Creator has revealed himself to humans in clear, unambiguous ways. He has sent them information about the past and about what is going to happen in future. Thus we have an adequate reference point through which we can examine anything on the planet Earth. The law of human nature is this. We become that what we watch. We can function only if we have the right reference point. Illustration about a couple of wild beasts in circus is very adequate to this case. Two beasts that we have of equal power, one against the other. We lock them up and feed one and not feed the other. Then we let them fight. Which one is going to win? Well, the one that we fed. Of those two beings in us, which one is going to win? The one inclined to do evil or the one inclined to do good? Well, certainly the one that we feed better. It all now depends on what food we feed our being with. What we are doing, what is that we think, what is that we read, that is all, what is that we watch, all that has influence on our moral status and way of life. For this is the absolute truth. There is the law of human nature, and here is what the Creator also says through one of his writers. He says, "My people are destroyed from lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I also reject you." When a famous Jewish scientist, Lapis, was asked how was it that he accepted the first concept we talked about, the Jewish concept, but also the second concept of the New Testament, unlike his kinsmen, that scientist responded, "I simply had time to read and study, while my kinsmen don't have time for that." We live in a modern world. We have various commitments, but if the average family can set aside 4 hours to watch TV, can it set aside time to research? All this that I have said to you, I ask you not to believe. Research it. Everyone must be certain about what he or she reads or hears. You probably know what John the Chrysostom said. He said, when we receive money, we always count it, but when we receive things pertinent to eternity, we just receive it without checking it. The greatest danger in today's world is indifference toward the truth. So we have heard this truth, but we didn't search to see whether it is right or not, let alone that it had any effect in our lives. These lectures have the aim to prove whether death is defeated enemy. Is the Creator interested in each one of us, each particular day? Or he just created the world and left it to fend for itself? Any of us can search to see whether these facts are true or not, and then apply it to his or her life, for that is the only purpose of today's life. Let me repeat once again, what are the things that cannot be purchased? Baby smile and love of the loving person. That is what makes a person happy, not material goods, academic titles, or anything else. We should be happy, but truly happy. We can only be happy if we want to help others. Such therapy is excellent during stress, depression, and all kinds of other medical disorders. The goal is to reach happiness, but through happiness, the goal is to answer the question, why are we on this planet? What is the purpose of life, and how our lives are going to end? Is death a conquered enemy? If Creator created human life, He can also recreate it. Geneticians today clone identical human beings, but there is something which is lacking. They simply cannot return the spiritual component to it. I'm simply not the same as my clone. I don't love the same way, I'm not sad in the same way. The spiritual capacity is totally different, yet Creator can return that component to us again when He sets about to recreate us. He will create again each human being. If geneticians can do that, so can the Creator, who in this manner has announced His existence to humans who live today on this earth. We have seen that He is interested in our future as well. For in the groups of writings that we see that there is Torah, the law, the reference point, Ketuvim, historical record about the past, but also Nevim, what will happen in future, and that Creator indeed does know the future. In the lecture about the mysteries of disappeared cities, we will see that there was foretelling about the cities. In accordance with their behavior was their fall and their end. What will be the end of our civilization? Tomorrow night we are going to have a lecture on the mysteries of disappeared civilizations. We are going to see history of ancient Babylon, the city of Petra, what was going on in Jerusalem for thousands of years. So the question is, did the Creator leave forecast of what was going to happen in future? He surely did. You will be able to see that tomorrow night. And here is one more notice, as I promised to you. Tonight you can review the literature related to these issues. There are about 10 different books. We have provided them, and tomorrow night and the night after tomorrow we are going to provide you with all the literature. I have certain recommendations about the literature. Here is one about the icons of evolution, the symbols of evolution. Then the wonders of creation in the plant life, could all that evolve just by itself. Then also the book about the world that was destroyed, what happened after the great flood, and how the entire civilization was destroyed, where do fossils and high mountains come from. Then the horrors that Darwinism brought upon humanity. Based on that book there was a film. Tomorrow those who come half an hour earlier, they will be able to view the film in its entirety. But you can also buy this book if you wish. Then there is a book about the laws of health and many other books. I also have to tell you that there is a book from Dr. Ivan Panin, Mathematics and Bible. It talks about his discoveries, what he discovered without computers more than 100 years ago. He discovered mathematical laws in the Mosaic books. You can all see that in the literature and have it as a reference point. Thank you for your attention.
Centar za prirodnjačke studije vam preporučuje nova izdanja. Čudesa stvaranja, 450 kolor fotografija i mnoštvo nevjerovatnih primjera o inteligentnom dizajnu. Svijet koji je uništen, da li se dogodio potop, strahote darvinizma, posljedice evolucije u svjetskim ideologijama. Djeco, Darwin nije znao istinu. Odličan priručnik za djecu i početnike u nauci. Obmana evolucije, najsveobuhvatnija kritika teorije evolucije. Najveće čudo prirode odgovara zašto kanjon Colorado posjeti 4 miliona ljudi godišnje. Knjige možete naručiti na telefone 051 214 145 i 065 681 366.
Novo u prodaji. Ako želite više informacija o temama, porijeklo života, misterije iz prošlosti, ratovi u nama, naručite sljedeća hit izdanja, Čudesa stvaranja, obmana evolucije, čudo imunog sistema, nabavka knjiga na telefon 065 681 366 ili u knjižarama Glasa Srpskog. Centar za prirodnjačke studije Banja Luka.